This is a story of old man John Thomas and the most terrifying trips I could possibly imagine. I first met John at Nottoway Correctional Center. I was 19 years old, I had just gotten my first major prison, and I had no idea what to expect. I saw all these new people doing all these new things, then I see this guy who looks like he's out of central casting. He's tall, he's covered in bad prison tattoos that have all faded together over the 30 years he's been locked up. He's got scars all over him, he's missing an eye, he's got a bad leg. He had that Danny Trejo vibe, that man, I've been through some stuff kind of vibe. My first major interaction with him was over the shower. Because when we would come in from rec, there were only a few minutes to jump in the shower and then go for count time. And if you weren't one of the first people in, you wouldn't get a shower and you would have to sit in a cell stinking. Some people were fine with that, but I worked out so often and so hard, and I just came in absolutely covered in sweat, and I couldn't go lay in my bed, so I'd have to go stand there, or go sit in the chair and try not to get sweat on anything. So I always found it worth it to run in and try to get a shower. So I ran in, I grabbed my stuff out of the chair, and I see one of the showers that doesn't have a towel over it. So I run over there, I rip the shower curtain open, I start to step in, and there's John half naked undressing. I was like, oh man, I'm sorry. I'm like, look away, I close the shower curtain, and I walk away. And I remember thinking, hey, is this guy gonna stab me? Because up to that point, everybody had told me, don't ever violate these things, don't ever do this, don't ever disrespect somebody. And I didn't know where that fit in the thing. I was like, man, was I supposed to know? Did I do something wrong? And thankfully, he came up to me later and was like, hey, youngin', man, I'm sorry I didn't put nothing on the shower, you're good. And that made me feel better because I was literally wandering around, do I need to, get something to defend myself? Do I need to worry about this? What's gonna happen? I ended up in a circle with guys that would play cards, and we would sit around and tell stories. And one of John's things was he supported himself and his drug habit, unfortunately, by smuggling things back from the chow hall. Because everybody thinks a glass eye is like a marble, but it's not. It's a little thing that's actually hollow. So he would make his money by smuggling drugs back from the visitation room. So he would go, he would get the package, he would stick it in his eye, he'd pop his eye back in, and even if they strip searched him, they would never ask him to pull his eye out because nobody ever thought of it. So he would get coke and heroin and anything you could think of. So finally somebody came to him and said, hey, I want to get some acid. A bunch of guys want to party. I need you to bring it back. He was like, cool, bet. So he gets a package, just stuffs it in there, stuffs his eye in, and goes back. And he said, I remember feeling really wired. I didn't really know what was going on. I pull it out and I realized it's not actually wrapped up. It's just loosely stuck in there. So he basically took 100 hits of acid straight to the retinal nerve, straight to the brain. I can't imagine how that felt. Anyways, so within, I think, minutes, he starts completely tripping, completely losing it. It takes a while for people to figure out what happened, and his cell partner saved his life, because otherwise, he would have gone with a hole, he would have gone to the hospital, he might have done something crazy, basically just locked him in the cell. And there was somebody on, guard duty every day, because he would sit in there, and he would just lay on the bed for hours, and then he'd be up moving around, making incomprehensible sounds, could not talk to anybody, was just stumbling through, and they made sure he never left the cell, he couldn't go to chow, and then he would be up for every count time. Sometimes they would literally try to put their hand over his mouth so he'd be quiet when they were coming around to count. So he did this for days, in this absolute daze of insanity, can't interact with people, is acting erratically, is not sleeping. So finally, he kind of comes back. He comes back to where he can communicate, and he tells people, he's like, man, I don't even have words to describe where I've been. It's crazy. It's life-changing. And he swears that it changed his life and that things were different, but he continued to have a drug habit. He continued to burn bridges by, bringing things back and not paying, or basically not having everything he was supposed to have because he had done some in the interim. But he was that old guy that despite how many people he owed or how many bridges he burned, everybody just liked him, so he got away with stuff that nobody else would have been able to get away from. But he still went through one of the most terrifying trips I can possibly imagine, and the only person I can think of who compared to that was when Thomas did Spice. And if you ever saw Spice or K2 or chicken or whatever you want to call it, it was absolutely the worst drug I saw in prison. Because it's unregulated chemical drug, and you never knew what it was going to be or what it was going to do. But guys were so desperate to get high, they would do anything. So Thomas liked to smoke a lot of pot, and he had heard it was a crazy trip, so he decides to do it one night. So I come back from apprenticeship, and the whole pod is freaking out. They're like, Jesse, yo, you got to go up to so-and-so cells. Thomas is in there, and he's losing it. So I go up there, and he's sitting in the cell, covered in sweat, his shirt off, his tongue out of his mouth, and he's going, he's trying to bite his tongue off. He's covered in, water for some reason. They've got bags of ice. They said he was overheating. It was to the point that he was, almost boiling hot in his head, so they were sticking, bags of ice down his pants. They were having to physically hold him there sometimes because he would lash out or try to get up and run around, all the while not even able to speak, just acting absolutely crazy. They're trying to hold his head back to pour water down his throat, and he's choking. It was like a scene out of a horror movie. So they tell me, they're like, yo, we all took one hit and we were good. He wanted to take more, so we ended up taking 2 or 3 and just started completely clucking out. He lost it. So we're coming up on count time. And how are we supposed to do this? He's in the wrong cell. Like, we got to get him back to the other cell. So I get somebody else to take him. I grab him by the arm, like really hard, like we're trying to do it. He grabs me by the arm and he kind of just relaxes and lets us do it. But we're waiting for him to fight because he was fighting earlier. We just kind of walk him to the cell, we get him in there, and we just shut the door. So I'm in there with him now. I'm in there with the guy going through what looks like a psychotic break, but he at least just went and laid down in the bed. So it's like, all right, cool. Like, he's just there. And I'm trying to talk to him, though. I was like, yo, it's going to be count time. Are you going to be good? And a couple times he looked at me, but he never responded, or he just had some kind of like weird, incomprehensible mumble. Then finally they come in for count. And the way they do it is they come in and they walk the bottom tier. They go up the steps and they walk the top tier. And we were almost the last cell on the top tier. So we had warning. So like they came in on the bottom. I was like, all right, man, they're going to be counting in a couple minutes. And he looked at me like it was clear he had understood something. So I was like, all right, man, now they're on the top tier. Like, you got to get up. And he kind of got up and he started just mumbling. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, dude, you got to be quiet. Like, you got to be quiet. And he keeps going. And I'm like, man, what do I put my hand over his mouth? Like, how do I get him to be okay? But thankfully, right as they got to the cell, he just stopped. So I don't know if he understood or he just, I don't know, maybe it was luck. They walk by, they do whatever. He goes right back, lays in the bed in like a fetal position and starts making that noise again, just mumbling to himself. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, let's just get through count. Like, we're good. It's got to wear off. Sure enough, later that night, he gets done and he starts telling me that he thought his tongue was missing. That's why he was doing the like this, because he thought his tongue was missing and he didn't know what was going on. He was trying to find his tongue and he couldn't drink because he didn't have a tongue. It was just insane. But again, what's so crazy is the number of people who did that, because that was such a horrifying experience. I expected people to be like, yo, I'm never doing spice. But not only did other people be like, yo, he looked like he tripped out. I want to try some. Thomas was like, man, maybe I'll do some more. Like, maybe I'll do it again. It's like, bro, you almost died. Like, what is wrong with you? Now, when I was at the dormitory and spice was just absolutely prevalent, you had basically Suboxone and spice, people would be clucking out every night. Like, people would be losing it. It would make them vomit all over themselves or all over the floor. They would just be kind of like doing crazy things and saying crazy things. I would go to try to use the bathroom and there would be a line of people vomiting in all the sinks and all the toilets. I can't even use the bathroom. It was an example of how bad the drug problem has gotten in prison. It was an example of how bad the situation is, how bad the mental health is when people are going to this rather than deal with reality. And substance use disorder is a disease. You have conditions of confinement that make it far worse. And then you have just a general system where this stuff is obviously coming in through somewhere, right? Like, it's not coming in magically. When I was at the dormitory, it was in the middle of the pandemic where there were no visits, so it wasn't coming in through visitation. So we have a system that is so fundamentally broken that people are choosing to basically lose their minds rather than do something else. Like, at least Old Man John did it by accident. All these other people chose to do it. And I tell you, it definitely gave me some perspective on life. Because there have been some times where I've been unwilling or unable to deal with reality. But when I think back about that, and when I was watching that firsthand, I was like, yo, I got to make some decisions in my life. Like, I got to really have priorities. And I think I was already on that path to begin with. But watching people lose their minds and go back again and again and just look like they were going to die and look like they were losing their mind, that was enough for me. That was when I was like, you know what? This is not the life I want to live. Like, you guys go this way, I'm going to go the other way.